Hi, I'm Gülce from Programs team from SALT. Thanks for coming today. I will give a brief introduction of Dima Srouji. Dima Srouji is an architect and visual artist exploring the ground as a deep space of rich cultural weight and a site for potential collective repair. She works with glass, text, archives, maps, plaster cast, and film, understanding each as an evocative object and emotional companion that helps her question what cultural heritage and public space mean in the context of Bilad al-Sham, especially in Palestine. And today, she is in town for her studio called City Design in RCA in London. And she is here with her students. But we are also in dialogue for the upcoming exhibition, Breaking Through a Dam. And actually, her work, A Crack in the Water followed by Return, is a huge inspiration for the exhibition because in the work, actually, she quotes Nura Erekat, her saying, breaking through a dam, and the exhibition will take its name from her work, in a way. So it's like a central part of the exhibition. So I'm very happy to have Dima here today. So I'm leaving the stage to her.
Oh,
thank you for coming.
Thanks everyone for being here. Thank you. It's been such a beautiful few days in Istanbul. It's my first time here, which is very surprising. And now it's one of those cities that you come to and you know that you'll forever come back. And it feels that way. So it feels like an important moment, actually, to show my work here and to be with the institution. So thank you for having me. I'd like to start by reading a little bit from a script that I've been working on for the last 3 years, actually more, since 2021, so almost 5 years. And the text is slightly abstract, but it also intertwines some of the things that Palestinians have been dealing with since forever, but especially in 2021 during the Sheikh Jarrah uprisings in East Jerusalem, and also, of course, under the ongoing genocide in Gaza. And Palestinians are beginning to understand that there is a relationship between our ascent towards liberation and our burial in the ground. The subterranean rise, a contradiction that defines much of what it means to be Palestinian today, is by design. The louder and more present our voice, the deeper we are penetrated into mass tombs. However, the systems at hand are making an ontological error. They've forgotten that for us to rise, we must first descend. Liberation for Palestinians begins below, in the strata and between our remnants, and in the cosmic realm above simultaneously, where our martyrs go. The land is our battleground and our burial place, but it's also our witness, our archive, and our paradise. The vertical dimension flows between the real and the surreal in Palestine. The viral chant across historic Palestine in Gaza and 48 and in the West Bank, Jannah, 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 Jannah ya watanna, describes this contradiction of heaven on earth, a death in the land, and an afterlife underground. In this talk, I may use ascent and descend below and above interchangeably. They all point to the same calculus, that Palestinian liberation is certain whichever way you excavate the land and the collective Palestinian body. This talk also moves vertically from the grain of sand to the cosmos, from subterranean ruins to imagined futures, unearthing the political, emotional, and material memories embedded in the ground. We'll sometimes hallucinate on archival images like these ones and footage that I found over the course of my practice, and other times also reflect on current mode of the survival at stake in Palestine. All of this is in an attempt to make sense of the whole that remains amongst us all. We are simultaneously fighting against apartheid and now genocide, while finding ways to imagine liberation and return. We Palestinians, inside and outside of the land, are in constant search in and on the ground for something that we are in the process of articulating while genocide unfolds. and the dust has yet to settle. As the dust sets on mounds of rubble over miles of destroyed lives in Gaza, we can only imagine that scale expanding to the West Bank while holding our breaths. And between the nightmares, both awake and at night, Palestinians everywhere are consciously and subconsciously building an imagination of liberation. Whether that is through our senses, smelling olive oil that your mom brings from home to your London apartment, or a small matluba gathering in your New York or Boston apartment, or a sonic performance in the halls of the Wonder Cabinet in Bethlehem, liberation is constant and is taking place already everywhere. To create a metaphysical state of return and resistance, the imaginary is crucial for us to access that space in order for it to ripple into the physical. Making for me is the way I try to reach as close as possible to what liberation might feel like. Making films, objects, archives, casts, vessels, and texts allow me to unfold potential motions of liberation. Working with artisans and makers in Palestine with materials of the ground, where each material, like glass and stone, become the lenses in which the stories that deserve some light begin to unravel. Since the land itself is the medium in which apartheid takes place, and the layers above and below the Earth's surface is where injustice happens day to day, it must also be where liberation does too. And so we dive together into that multidimensional verticality of space and time. I'll cut it short. The architectural discourse has called for a change over the last few years, and it's apparent that as a spatial practitioner, it's important to be open about our possibilities and our positionalities and why our practices take form the way that they do today. So it's kind of like foregrounding a little bit of the context of my practice before I actually show some projects. So I'll be showing some research, some kind of contextualization of why the practice looks like it does before I end with a few images. But for me, my art is a kind of a form of healing, which is an overused term, but I think in Palestine, especially today and with intergenerational trauma, it's why artists do the work that they do, because there are skills that we have, and it's an existential question. And so it does require some honest reflection to also think about, okay, why are we doing these things, all of us, in very similar ways? A lot of people are thinking about archaeology today. A lot of people are thinking about water and water infrastructure. A lot of people are thinking about the Canaanite history of Palestine and returning also some of the rituals that we've lost over the years that were only present 100 years ago. So, for example, like my grandmother used to go on the rooftops of the house to pray for rain if the rain was delayed, and would turn her clothing inside out. And there was a song and a dance that we used to actually practice. And these are the practices that I think we've forgotten. Same thing with material culture. And most Palestinian artists today are kind of dealing with these practices, both cultural, oral history, material culture in different ways. But it seems like we're all trying to kind of build and protect things that we've already lost, to push it also to the future, to make sure that we're not exterminated. And so to kind of ground why these things are psychospatial and that they're also embedded in the body, an example of that is not only personal experiences growing up, but some of them are subconscious. In this case, it's a real kind of a moment in my personal history that I think stuck with me, and now kind of post-rationalizing it, going back to that moment, you can clearly see it in this image. So here you have Faris Saudeh, I believe was his name. Yes, Faris Saudeh, who is a young Palestinian boy in our neighborhood in Beit Jala in the second Intifada in the early 2000s, where he was throwing stones at an Israeli tank, and he was murdered during this intifada, not during the capturing of this image, but at a later similar moment. And the image in the background is the cultural center, the theater, where in my neighborhood in Beit Jala, which is a small village near Beit Lahem, where the stone facade here kind of speaks volumes. Like 80% of the architecture of Palestine is stone, is required to be stone clad from an Ottoman regulation, actually. And so there's a kind of a very intense spatial material relationship between our resistance on the ground, our architecture, and our relationship to material culture. So here Faris Aude is holding the stone in his hand, and then in the elevation you have the stone that's torn down by the Israeli bombings in the second intifada. And one way to think about it is, what does it mean to work with rock? What does it mean to work with stone? And if you ask a Palestinian to be militant, for example, we always begin with a rock. And so notice the presence of stone in this image, notice Faris's hand, and notice the facade where a stone elevation is fragmented, revealing the cement structure beneath it. And the archaeology of this image, or the excavation of the elevation, helps us understand how materials and objects enter the Palestinian psyche and attach themselves in our memories, where the fragmented stone here might be the direct cause of our dismembered body afterwards. I also grew up foraging in the Habayel of Palestine, collecting rocks and fossils and flowers and bullets that you can see here collected over the years. Shards of glass and shards of ancient pottery as well in the Solomon pools here in the background. And I used to curate them in my bedroom at home. I almost felt like an intimate relationship with the bullets as much as the ancient pottery that I collected. And so they became kind of emotional companions, both things that were dangerous and things that felt like they grounded us in the particular context. And there's something about that relationship between the ground and the emotional body that relates to the history of archaeology. And you can think of it as a kind of excavation of the self. You can also think of it as an excavation of the land. And it reminds me of this concept of prosopopeia, which is, it literally means the imagined absent or dead body or thing represented as speaking. And so prosopopeia has existed in Palestinian oral history and folklore for a generation, like the haunted springs and wells in Tawfiq Kanan's work. He writes about the jinns that were told to have built the Solomon pools, seen in the image before. And you can think of that as a kind of emotional excavation in relationship to the land, but also a literal excavation of the landscape as well. And so you can see the layers of the landscape here in an Ottoman diagram, actually printed in Istanbul in 1900 it's a geological illustration. It's a rare drawing of the section of the earth, and it's an analysis of its crust. The diagram tells us more about the way gases move through the core of the earth to its crust. It tells us about the density of the layers and the chemical makeup of each one. And you can notice how the Earth's strata here have been labeled and numbered so scientifically by geologists. What I try to do in my practice is to think about what scientific methodologies mean in the context of the underworld, but to also call out the soul of that depth rather than the numbers that sterilize and simplify those layers. I think we all want to understand what the intertwining strata are beyond the type of rock and the scientific name. In the case of the archaeological excavations across Palestine, which I'll get into, it's especially important to think about how Western institutions funded them, mostly by Zionist support historically, to think about why they were interested in digging to begin with, because of the Bible and the Torah, and why they hired Palestinians to do it for them, including hundreds of women and children. So those experiences remain in those layers, and that history is embedded in that land.
Here today of the Jewish people, General Moshe defense minister and architect of the swiftest, most overwhelming victory of all time.
That garden workshop, piled high with the discoveries of countless digs, is his hideaway from the pressures of public life. Archaeology is his passion, but it is not all-consuming, for the art of war is also a passion.
يوما ما موشي ديان وقف في الأمم المتحدة وكان حامل عملة قديمة وقال هاي عملة أسلافي وأجدادي، هاي العملة تم أخذها من هاي البلدة من سبسطية، وحاول في هذاك الخطاب يبين إنه كحركة صهيونية في إرث وفي تراث. الفكرة إنه اللي إحنا بنحاول إنه نوصلها إنه الناس اللي كانت موجودة يوما ما والناس اللي موجودة اليوم هم تسلسل حضاري طبيعي جدا، جيل سلم جيل، تغيرت الأديان وفقا للحياة السياسية اللي كانت موجودة والعسكرية أيضا، ولكن ظلت محاولات الإسرائيليين من حفريات هارفارد وصولا لليوم الحالي في محاولات طمس وصرخة الآثار الموجودة في سبسطية.
When you find a really good piece, what's the feeling like?
If it's a good piece, if you see it, sometimes I go to office and I see workers digging a ditch or paving a road, and I go down or building a house in the foundation, and you see a piece of a jar, and then you uncover it, and another one, a small one near that. You feel as if a veil was opening, and you go into a different period. Excitement, I can't say more than, but very, I get very excited.
Do you also get excited? And I don't want you to take my meaning in the wrong way, but does soldiering also excite you?
Yes, not in the same kind, but I think that wars are the most exciting events in life. It's a matter of death and life, and yes. And you probably, I hope, get excited when you watch it in a film. Just imagine if you don't watch it, but you live it.
The rage I feel when I watch this video. That's Moshe Dayan. He was a minister of defense in Israel for many years. He was also the face of the Israeli military during the Six-Day War when Israel occupied Jerusalem in 1967. And the excitement felt by Dayan in his excavations and soldiering, the relationship between the two, he says that he felt as excited about excavating as much as he did about soldiering or about making wars. And it conveys that entanglement between the two, not just in terms of how the archaeologists practice and how military operations happen, but also in relation to the emotional relationship of joy for exploring, joy for conquering. Although the conference was held by Israeli archaeologists in the 1970s to stop Dayan from illegal looting, he did a lot of illegal looting in the West Bank. He used to go to Gaza every single Saturday for about 20 years. So a lot of the archaeological excavations in Gaza that happened between the 50s and 60s were done illegally by Moshe Dayan, and those excavations now live in Dayan's archive. It's a private kind of domestic archive. And what was I saying? That conference was happening to try to stop him, obviously, by liberal Zionist archaeologists that were they considered themselves progressive, but that didn't do very much. It continued for many years after that. The Nakba massacres and the Palestinian massacres that took place in 1948, continuing till this day, such as Deir Yassin, and of course genocide in Gaza today, they don't sit in a vacuum. These horrifying events sit in relation to what is a continued apartheid system of ethnic cleansing, but it's important to understand that archaeology plays a really crucial role in implementing the system very clearly, and it's a continuation from the colonial structures that were built a century before by the British Mandate as well. I have a quick note here on the meaning of heritage. I think I'm going to skip it, but the gist is that the word heritage comes from the Latin root hereditare, meaning to inherit, referring to the transfer of cultural, familial, and historical elements across generations. In Arabic, the term for heritage is athar, or athar, derived from the root waratha, also meaning inheritance. heritage thus encompasses both temporal and spatial continuity, extending to both tangible and intangible elements. And in this context, the act of preserving and rebuilding Palestinian cities during and after apartheid and genocide is not solely about conserving physical structures, but equally about safeguarding the collective memory that has been passed down through generations. And so in foregrounding a little bit of the practice and the projects that I'll show, I think that there is this kind of link between heritage as tangible and intangible, and sometimes those things blur. Tangible heritage, let's say, what that means is the physical act of making something, the physical output of the production process. So if you're a potter, the pottery is the tangible heritage. But the intangible heritage is you would consider that as oral history or a story that you can't physically touch, smells, things that are more ephemeral. But I think in the Palestinian understanding of heritage, those things were never categorized in that way. You are the potter, and you've been making pottery in the same way for thousands of years. So the same thing goes for glass blowing and for stone carving and for food making. And I think in my practice, I try to kind of make sure that those things are inherently kind of connected together. And so we start with this really important river. It's Nahr al-Na'amin, which is a river that runs. The first cross on the top is Akka, which is a port city. And then moving down, you have this lower X is the Raphael Systems weapons factory, which is the largest weapons factory in historic Palestine today. Israeli weapons factory where they make all of the iron domes, they make all the missiles, they have bunkers underground. That's why it looks like it's an open terrain. That huge circle is Raphael Systems. And then the line in the middle and the middle cross is a really important archaeological site. And the line moving down is the Roman name for the river is Belus. This is one of the earliest ever examples of glassmaking in the world. They found archaeological furnaces that are made out of brick with glazed glass on it, so they can have evidence of glassmaking, really early glassmaking here. And the reason this river is so important for us historically is because it has a kind of a spiritual history as well. So women would go cleanse their bodies there during their menstrual cycles. They would go pray for fertility in this river. And we also have evidence that the silica there literally would heal wounds faster. And the reason that it's kind of this magical spot in Palestine is also because of the sand used to come from the Nile. As the Nile flows from the south to the north, which is unusual, the deposits of sand would sit in the Eastern Mediterranean, and we had a very different type of sand than the rest of the Mediterranean. And so it's well documented that the Belus is kind of the birthplace of glass making, one of the hubs of glassmaking in the region. And it was known as kind of this by Josephus, who isn't super reliable historian, but very kind of poetic in his writings, calls it a magical spot on the outskirts of the city where sand entered at one end and left the other as a river of glass. And I think what's important to know about this river today is that it's a highly polluted area, obviously, because of the weapons factories. You can see in the image underneath that there are Israeli neighborhoods and settlements that are taking over the landscape. And it's not uncommon to think about inventions like this in the region as accidental. So these historians would kind of come up with kind of ridiculous stories about, they figured out how to make glass accidentally when like ships were parking and they wanted to make a fire because it was cold, and that fire resulted in the glassmaking process. And so there's kind of this like dumbization of the innovations of the region. These are the drawings of the archaeological fragments. This is the archaeological fragment that they found in the area. And then the furnace is, I think, kind of interesting, very interesting spatially and as an architectural object. So they would make it out of mud brick and then tear it down after the fire so that they can access the slab. And this is what the river looks like today. It's one of the most polluted areas in historic Palestine. And Haifa, which is the city just south of Akka, has now Israel's highest cancer rates. And we managed with my students a few years ago to take a water sample from this river back to Imperial College, and they said it was the most polluted water they've ever tested. This is basically like chemical and lots of different types of chemicals that are deposited in this river. And it's also ironic because of the relationship of the menstrual and cleansing rituals that were taking place at the time. So you have this like red river, and it's almost like the haunting women are coming back to haunt the landscape. And it's not unusual for that history to have been so violent around the river. The British Army and the Israeli Army militias early on in the late British Mandate in the 30s were doing military operations and training using the river as a training ground. Meanwhile, the Palestinian neighbors were still using the streams as fresh drinking water. So you have these kind of contrasting histories moving in parallel, not just recently, but historically throughout colonial time. Weirdly enough, I was telling my parents that I was looking at the history of this river, and my dad texting me with his family archive that says the cause of death of an ancestor of ours, and it says that he was really drunk because of a fight with a British soldier, and then he fell in the river and drowned. So not only am I obsessed with this river because of its relationship to the healing rituals and because of the birthplace of glass, but also there are actual like ancestral remains coincidentally in the river as well. Yeah, these are some more images around the area of the excavations, what kind of material they found. So look at the image on the top right. This is what the sand around that river used to look like. So it's like thousands of fragments from glassmaking histories. At the time when I first put this slide together, I wanted to talk about Sheikh Jarrah because this was the moment that the Israeli army was making up kind of excuses for why Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan were relevant to the Israeli history and the biblical history, and it's really important to actually understand the indigenous histories of the landscapes. And you know, you have these kind of superpositions of the image in the background of the one thing that kind of they rely on, which is the history of an ancient Jewish tomb. Meanwhile, the present day scenario is that there are thousands of Palestinians that live there on Canaanite landscape as well. And so you have these what's called the rule of superposition, where the excavators would, or the archaeologists would kind of ignore a series of strata, remove those, pick up the ones that they're interested in and stop excavating. So you actually don't continue excavating prior to the Iron Age. So the Iron Age, where Jewish history is relevant, then you stop and you freeze the excavation. But there are things below and above that are also relevant to us that are completely disregarded. And so you here on the right side, you have literally like performing archaeological narration, Zionist archaeological tour guides that are not archaeologists. They're kind of tour guides that are kind of trained through settlements like settlement-funded projects like Elad, who bring millions of dollars from American televangelists. And they use these stage sets to bring in kind of lots of American Jewish students during Aliyah or during what is their summer program called when they come to Palestine for the first time? Do you guys remember? It's not Anyway, they're mostly 18-year-old Americans that go and sit in the stage, and they're told the kind of a particular Zionist archaeological narratives while there is a Palestinian village behind them, but that presence is completely ignored. So it becomes a stage set. So there's something really interesting that happens in the Zionist psyche, that you're there facing the archaeological excavation, and then behind you in the backdrop is actually Palestinian village that exists today, that then is completely erased from the visual relationship to the space. Birthright, thank you. I don't know, I guess I don't spend much time thinking about them. So this is an illustration of the depth unknown idea that I was talking about, where this is a kind of a British archaeological rendering of what a strata might look like and the rule of superposition. And so you never know what's underneath, right? You kind of stop excavating when it suits you. This is an example of what happens when you make an illustration and you actually don't really think about what you're drawing, what you're noting. And Sebastia right now is one of those archaeological sites that is most urgent in Palestine, because it's surrounded by settlers on all sides. And it was just announced that the civil administration, which is the Israeli authority in the West Bank, now has full rights to the site. So what this looks like here will look exactly like that in the rest of the West Bank archaeological sites. So that was in Jerusalem, but now they have the authority, as of last week, to do this everywhere in the West Bank, fully, like Area A, Area B, Area C. They have full control. Ooh. And so an example of things that are ignored constantly is, it says here, this is the Harvard excavations in 1908. That was funded by Zionists. On the surface of the rock, is in some cases under the walls of the Omri Palace, there are oil cups, circular receptacles, and shallow troughs. Such are found all over Palestine. These are pre-Israelite and show that the hilltop was probably a bare rock when Omri bought it. Like, that's super counterintuitive. So you have the presence of pre-Israelite history, where you have oil cups and circular receptacles and so on, but then at the same time you have cisterns, which means human occupation, but then the conclusion is that actually it was bare. Another site that I've been looking at is the Tell Ajul, which is ancient Gaza, and I've been working on this for the last 3 years. This is the excavation files. They're called tomb cards that now sit in the basement of the Institute of Archaeology at the UCL, University College London. There's about 2,000 of these tomb cards, and the archaeologists in 1930 collected every single material and annotated it in the tombs that they excavated and exhumed in Gaza. So there were around 2,000 tombs in Gaza, in ancient Gaza, that they excavated, and they would draw literally the bodies that were there. They would also label from A to Z how many grave goods were buried with those bodies for the afterlife, and they would describe exactly which way the head was facing, what they were wearing, the sex, and what materials were there. I mean, like, quite psychotic behavior. The archaeologists at the time were also eugenicists, so they were also measuring skulls to determine a new race. And let me see what this is. Oh, yeah. So the skulls that they took back with them now exist at the Cambridge University Duckworth lab. And I've been harassing them for the last 3 years to give me access to the materials. And these are all the human remains that eugenicists were measuring to determine the materials. Sorry, I should have done a trigger warning, but we're not in the West, so I think it's fine. And what we've been doing is kind of looking at the archive of ancient Gaza across about 15 different institutions. The excavation material is all over the world. We have it, a lot of it is in the UK. And I think what's interesting about this project, where we'll open the exhibition, and it's a permanent series of installations at the Palestinian Museum in April. But what's interesting about this is how unusually, well, no, not unusual, how much of an obsession there is with dead bodies in Palestine. There's an exoticization of the dead, and thinking about excavated tombs and an analysis of the body in relation to Gaza today, I think is incredibly important, especially where you have lots of body parts and dismembered bodies going missing across Gaza, organ farming, largest skin bank in the world, and we can go on. And this is an image of the number. Each body has a number, and it tells you all of the details that you need to know about them. What we're trying to do with the exhibition as well is look at actually who did these excavations. There's an archaeologist that comes in. They come in with money, usually from Zionist bankers or funders, also with the support of an American or European English excavation team from a university like the UCL. And the actual labor, a lot of the time, is local. So you have mostly Palestinian women that were photographed and labeled as different types. So you have, if you notice on the right side, it says types of women in Palestine. But they were also the excavators that were digging in the landscape. And this is one of the images in Sebastião where you have hundreds of women doing the excavation work across multiple seasons. So they would carry the material on their heads on these baskets that were hand-woven by them, hand-woven by using straw from the landscape. And the land that they're excavating is also their land. They literally own it. These are the villagers that own the landscape. They had to get rid of all of the agricultural material there, cut down all the trees, cut down all of the wheat farms, and then excavate it on behest of Harvard University at this point. And all the tools that were used to do the excavations were also labored by them. So even the baskets are made by the women. And you also have some children kind of carrying rocks on their heads. Meanwhile, the wife of the archaeologist is like standing there with a white umbrella, and the archaeologist Leon here standing on the hilltop, just looking down as the machine works. And I think what's really nice about these images is actually there's a lot of intimacy between the women working and the material they find. Not only are they actually making the baskets as well, but the materials they're digging up are kind of maternal ancestors and maternal goddesses that they're finding. So you have the goddess of fertility, you have the goddess of love and war, Astarte, and they're made out of the sand that we just spoke about from the Belus, and they're cast in mud molds, the mud coming from the same area. And so there's this kind of infinite relationship between the land and the Palestinian body that you just can't, as violent as the excavation process is, as violent as the occupation is, there's this infinite connection that you just can't break. And I find that incredibly powerful. So here you have some of the images of the basket making for the excavation. And I think something that I think a lot of Palestinians also think about a lot is the relationship of archaeological sites and heritage sites as public space. We don't think of them as separate to us. They're not frozen in time, that these public spaces were used and still used for celebrations, for weddings, for meeting your boyfriend in secret when your parents are not allowing you because it's kind of on the outskirts of the city. It's a threshing ground for wheat. And this lady here is talking about how she used to go to the Roman Forum in Sebastião and sing songs with her parents as they're threshing the wheat. And this is what's happening in Sebastião today. You have the army coming in every Friday, and it's starting to be developed into a tourist attraction for Zionist tours. I'm going to rush through this, but the point of this diagram is to talk about how the archaeology unit, the Israeli archaeology unit, is actually under the Ministry of Defense. And so the relationship between Moshe Dayan archaeology and the military is not just like coincidental. They literally built an infrastructure of governance that creates an archaeologist that is armed and supported militarily and financially through the Ministry of Defense. So any Israeli archaeologist that goes to these sites is supported by Israeli soldiers, and they come in with machine guns and so on. Okay, so kind of going back to this, one project that I want to start with is kind of thinking about the Palestinian female body in relation to the land and using these motifs, which is the arched window that you kind of often see in votives, offerings for the Virgin Mary across Palestine, and triptychs across multiple churches and sacred spaces often have the arched motif. And instead of here having a sacred image of Virgin Mary, here you have the image of the female archaeologist sifting through the soil looking for the artifacts. And this is one of the projects called Maternal Labor, and there are about maybe 30 of these prints that were hanging in an exhibition not so long ago. And the Red River, which is made out of handmade glass, hand-blown glass by the Twam family in Palestine and Jabba. I've been working with them for 10 years. And this kind of the translation of research to making goes from, all of those slides that I showed you on the balus, on the pollution, on the Red River being a kind of a signal to the history of healing in that space. Down to, returning to the material of glass and then hovering it and suspending it above the ground. And so it doesn't sit alone in this case. Usually there's also a video similar to the one that I showed earlier where the history of glass is also displayed alongside the Red River. So it's contextualized with some of that history. And Hollow Forms is a project of glass that I've been working with the Tam family for a long time. And after a few years of working together with them, I realized that they also work with an anonymous family in Hebron, where they do kind of replicas of archaeological vessels, and they sell them for the black market. And most of the people that buy them in Jerusalem are either Israeli, and then they sell them on eBay, or they're Western tourists. And I found that kind of incredible. And the reason I love it so much is because you actually can't, the craft is still alive. These people have been making glass for thousands of years and they still know how to make it now. And I think it's super funny that people like the Victoria and Albert Museum have these vitrines where there are spotlights and everybody cares so deeply about the archaeological artifact. And for all of us, we're like, yeah, let Abu Marwan just make another one and you stick it in there. And that's literally what I did at the Victoria and Albert Museum. I asked them to do an installation where I replaced some of the original pieces. These are all from Palestine. So we replaced some of the original pieces with the replicas, and added also tomb cards inspired by the tomb cards from Gaza that I showed you earlier, but making imaginary ones where imagining where these pieces should go back. So for example, if it's a perfume bottle, there are people that still make perfume in Nablus, so that one should go back to Nablus. If it's an oil decanter, my grandma uses oil every day on the table, so it goes back to my grandma's house. And so they're kind of playful and kind of a dark comedy. And then this is another installation of the pieces where imagining how they might be wrapped up in storage and returned home. With a little note that says, return to Bethlehem on them. This is the Tam family making some of those replicas. Abu Marwan and his family, it's about 7 generations of glassmaking. And they just have it inside their house, so they live upstairs and then their workshop is downstairs. Another iteration of the Ghosts project was replicating some of the pieces that are in Western museums from Palestine originally, making a double of them and bringing those home as a kind of an, let's say, like a play of restitution. And this is another installation called Grave Goods, where those pieces are, this opened actually during Easter, just after October 7th in 2023. So this was a chapel space that I built with the sound of Byzantine chants that allow us access to that cosmic space from the subterranean to the cosmic. And thinking about our martyrs and using those grave goods that were annotated in Petrie's tomb cards and using them to remake grave goods that allow, imagining how our martyrs can use those grave goods as an access to the afterlife. Almost like a portal of resurrection in some ways. In the sound, there's also an interview with my grandmother talking about how she learned how to read time in Ramle, where she was from before 1948. And Ramle, in the name of the village, means grain of sand. So there are all of these like crazy beautiful connections where my grandma is from Ramle. She learned how to read time in Ramle. We're kind of playing with colonial time in the work as well, and thinking about kind of disorientation in time and space at the same time. Each one of the pieces was designed either completely fictional, imagining what an object of liberation might look like and a grave good that might give us access to the afterlife, or some of them were replicas of real grave goods that were buried in Gaza as well. Another project was maintaining the sacred that I did in the first Islamic biennial in Jeddah, where called Maintaining the Sacred, kind of in honor of the craftsmen of the Dome of the Rock that constantly renovate and remake the plaster carved windows called qamariyas. Each one takes about 6 months to make, and the Israeli occupation forces constantly break them to throw tear gas into the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa. That's why there's kind of these wood structures that are holding the object up as a way to honor the craftsmen that they're always standing on scaffolding, working on the work like this. And sadly, Abu Ahmad was the last qamariya maker in Jerusalem, and he just retired. And so any of the broken windows are kind of frozen in time now. This is what they look like, the broken ones. And each one takes about 6 months, and there's about 30 broken ones, so it'll be about 15 years of renovations before they fix them. And actually, it's not even just one panel, because there's 2 windows, actually. There's one on the inside and one on the outside, so it would be double the time. I created an index of fragments from those broken windows and used those fragments as a way to design, and using the idea of the scaffolding and the constant maintenance as a way to design the motifs. So this is the work with Munir Nasser using Jerusalem stone and Bethlehem with the motifs in the front. So some of them are coming from the history of qamariya windows of, like the plant-shaped ones on the left are from the Dome of the Rock. And then some of the people sitting down are kind of looking at the use of the Dome of the Rock as a public space. It's one of the only remaining public spaces in Palestine, in Jerusalem, for Palestinians. Usually people would go sit there, eat a sandwich, because they get a permit only for 24 hours if they're coming from the West Bank, and sometimes even for 12 hours. So you leave at 6 in the morning and you have to go home at 6 p.m. So really all you want to do is go to the Dome of the Rock and just sit there for 12 hours. And that's what people do. They just picnic under the dome. It's really beautiful. So this was kind of in honor of that as a public space. another iteration of the Qamariya window, where a lot of the archaeological landscapes that I was surveying, not just Sebastian, Gaza and Jericho and Nazareth and different archaeological sites, Qasr Hisham, kind of bringing back those motifs and bringing them to life in different ways. And I think this is the Mosaic Room's windows, called the 4 Moons from Home. It's one of the most meaningful projects I've ever done. It just opened last week. It's a permanent installation in London in that space, which is really significant for the Global South in London, a space that feels safe for all of us, because the UK is not that friendly at the moment, especially with, there's a lot going on, but with, anyway, we don't need to get into it. But it was an amazing reopening. The 4 Moons from Home is a title that kind of signals or represents the idea of the Qamariya, which means the moon window and filtered moonlight and so on. And each window represents a different season in Palestine. So you have winter, spring, summer, and fall. And all of the motifs are borrowed from different Qamariya histories, but also plants and flora in Palestine across different seasons, especially focusing on the food culture in Gaza that kept people alive during the famine. So khubbeze, for example, grows widely in Palestine, especially in the winter. And when genocide was when the blockade on Gaza during 2023-24, when famine was really bad, they were able to survive using these indigenous plants. That's what it looks like from the inside. I'm going to skip these because I've talked about these already. Hollow Forms projects in multiple iterations. An archaeological project with Depth Unknown, this collective that we started that continues to work on archaeological sites everywhere. This is Dirar Kalash, who's an incredible sound artist that we worked with to redesign and rebuild the soil that was excavated. So if you imagine an archaeological site that was excavated, all the negative space or the soil that was taken, including the artifacts, we created monuments out of that and imagine what that negative space looks like. And that's what these foam pieces are. And embedded sound in them. So we recorded 12 different sounds from 12 different holes or voids that were excavated by the Americans. And you could hear sounds of tanks. You could hear sounds of gunfire. You could also hear birds. You could hear people strolling at night. So each monument kind of has this idea of the prosopopeia, the objects being able to speak from the dead. I'm trying to, I don't know how much time I have, it's 8. I'll skip through these, but I want to end on that, which is the work that I'll show here soon with Gulshe in the exhibition that she mentioned on Breaking Through the Dam. And this project was done for the Sharjah Art Biennial a few years ago with gender studies and disability studies professor Jasbir Pawar, who helped me kind of think through what it means to be dismembered and what Nadira Shalhoub Kufarkian, who's an incredible anthropologist in Palestine, Armenian anthropologist in Palestine, calls ashla, which in Arabic ashla is a very particular term. It's hard to translate to English. The closest translation is dismemberment, but it's much more than that. It really focuses more on the flesh being torn apart. And I think what this project tries to do, what is it called? A crack in the water followed by return. And the reason it's called a crack in the water followed by return is because I think what we're all trying to do as Palestinian artists is restitch our bodies, restitch our histories, restitch our narratives, and restitch our relationship to the land. And I think especially with witnessing literal dismemberment, there is something incredibly, I think, kind of bodily about our relationship to Palestine that needs to be worked through, not just psychic. And one way to think about this is, okay, what are the practices of healing that are required to literally heal your wounds? Like, swimming in that Belus River to heal your wounds, or using the bathtub as a cleansing space, or rituals for cleansing, taking a bath. And the bathtub in Gaza, especially in the last 2 years and in my childhood, was used as a site of shelter. So because of the way that it's designed and the material, it's really useful to hide in there in case of bombings. And if you don't have enough time, for example, to run down the stairs, which under the stair in the basement is usually the safest. I'm sure you all familiar with this with earthquakes here. Maybe you hide in the bathtubs too. No. Okay, so very particular. And there is a film that my brother made called 3 Promises, using my mom's footage from the Intifada, where she apologizes to me publicly in this video, which is quite crazy. But she says, when the bombings were really bad, as a mother, I had to make a choice between who goes on the bottom of the tub, who goes on top of them, and then who goes on the top. And she said, Dima, I'm sorry, but I chose that your brother goes on the bottom, so he's safest, and then you're in the middle, and then I'm on top. And there's clearly like something here that I'm working through, but also that's quite intergenerational. And when I first made this project, I had no memory of ever hiding in a bathtub. My mom's film had not come out. And when it all kind of happened, I was completely blown away by the choice of using a bathtub. And anyway, what it shows is footage of water kind of cleansing the land, and Nakba footage from 1948 playing backwards, and 1967 playing backwards. So you see the timestamps from the found footage in the archives playing backwards. Let me see, I think I might have a video of it here. Yeah. It also looks like the water is draining, and then it looks like the children that are crossing the bridge into Jordan are moving backwards. The reason I'm showing it in this way is that so you can see it properly in the exhibition. And the sound that was playing there was also from the Liberation Orchestra that I found kind of total by coincidence when I was shazamming a song on my way to a protest in New York during the Sheikh Jarrah uprisings. And it was the first time ever that like 80,000 people were going in the streets of New York to protest for Palestine. It was a particularly unique moment. And I was, shazamming the song in the car. Later that night, made this short film, and realized way later, while I was using it in the film already, that it was composed by a Norwegian composer to protest the building of a dam in Norway, which was completely mind-blowing as well. So there are kind of these like psychic, strange things that constantly happen in practice that feel like liberation is somehow possible, And I think I'll end on that. Yeah? I think that's the last slide anyway. Thank you.